behind me on the screen, you see Paul Joseph Watson, who has become quite successful as a new right or alt-right media figure. And I've met him in person a couple of times. I worked with him during a Bilderberg conference, and I've been a guest at least twice on the Alex Jones show while he was hosting. So I know him a bit. And of course, I've followed his work here and there over the years, and many will remember him to be against the left versus right paradigm, and also against the East-West paradigm. But of course, over the last few years, he morphed into this alt-right or new right figure and became very, very successful. And that video behind me has the title, "Conservatism is the New Counterculture." So that's the message that we hear from Paul Watson, many others. We're the new punk rock, we're the new counterculture, we're the rebels, and anything conservative is now rebellious and anti-establishment and against the system. Now, it is usually elites who determine what the dominant political direction is, and elites also determine what the competing counterculture is. And so for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, the elites might decide that right wing is supposed to be the dominant ideology, and the left is going to be the counterculture. And then we might see a switch, and the left becomes the mainstream. The left becomes dominant politically and culturally, and the right wing becomes counterculture and rebellious, right? So we need to look beyond this, way beyond this message that we're getting here from Paul Joseph Watson. And if we look at the past, especially the early stages of the Cold War, we remember that the West was fairly right-wing, very strict. And in a bad way, okay? So, and back in those days, of course, many people, minorities, women, young people, they were sick of the status quo. They were sick of the dominant conservative or so-called conservative sphere and the dominant conservative culture and dominant conservative politics. And back then, the same three superpowers existed: China, Russia, the US. It's the same superpowers today. And these superpowers decide what the dominant political ideology is and what the counterculture is. So in the past, in the West, for example, in the 50s and 60s, there was a hunt. There was a hunt for the communists. Communists were hunted down. There was the Committee on Un-American Activities. Prominent actors were investigated because of their communist ideas or possible communist ties. And sometimes these investigations were justified. You had actual extremists in Hollywood, or actual communist agents in Hollywood. But many times, decent people were attacked and their lives were destroyed and they were harassed because of this witch hunt, because of the suspicion they might be on the left. And in the past, we didn't see any meaningful analysis of the sins of the past, you know, like what the empires did. So British colonialism, the Nazi era, genocide of Native Americans, the slave trade. So in the 50s and 60s and before that, the mainstream did not want to talk about these issues. They did not want to cover this issue. Sex was regarded as dirty unless it was boring sex and between married people. Anything else was regarded as a sin, dirty, even criminal. Kids and teens were put under psychological pressure. Their feelings were proclaimed to be dirty and sinful. That was, and of course, pornography was illegal. The powerful church leaders, of course, back in the old days, these church leaders in the West were aligned with the politicians, were aligned with the empire, you know, and churches back then, they were very oppressive, especially in Europe, right? Very oppressive. Kind of fascist in certain ways, and they were preaching values in those churches which the politicians didn't really live. You know, it was just proclaimed everything is nice in the West, or we are we have the moral authority, we have the moral high ground, everything's so good. And the politicians, they didn't live up to any of these standards. So a lot of fear, a lot of feelings of guilt. We saw in those churches back in the old days. The churches, they wanted to get inside your head. They wanted to get inside your bedroom. And a lot of people became really sick of that. Women were oppressed. Yes, rape in a marriage was considered legal. Men could beat women and get away with it fairly easily. Homosexuals were harassed, put in prison. Transgender people were left alone, treated like dirt. And the mainstream society, they supported more or less what the so-called conservative politicians did, right? So violent foreign policy, people were okay with it. Violent domestic policy, the voters were okay with that. Then, the news were censored. The industry and business was corrupt. Television promoted a false sense of reality. The sitcoms in the old days were so full of it. The perfect family, the harmony, real problems, and the gritty reality was not covered in those shows. And if a television show would do something considered controversial, it would always be a scandal. And rock bands or bands, they had to wear suits and ties and have the neat haircuts and all that. Legally, you had almost no way of defending yourself against narcissists and psychopaths. The laws just were not there, not good enough. So there was a lot of oppression in families. There was a lot of sexual abuse in families. And, of course, not all families, but you know what I mean. Lots of criminal activity in families, and the head of the family might go to church every Sunday and create this perfect, harmonious image. But reality was gritty. Reality was tough. And especially young people and women and minorities, they understood that. They knew reality was terrible. And there was no way of really using your free speech and using your constitutional freedoms. You were oppressed every step of the way. So then you saw fascism in school. The school system in the West was absolutely terrible. And many people were sick of this. They were absolutely sick of this. There were rumblings and the possibility of an actual organic change, an actual real revolution. And the elites back in the old days, they understood that quite well. So it was the elites who controlled the revolution, the so-called left counterculture. And just like today, when elites use psychometrics through Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and of course other algorithms and programs like it, just like the elite pretty much knows today what different kinds of people are thinking and feeling. In the old days, this was done by opinion research. This was done by old school snitches and informants in all places in society, telling the authorities what the man on the street was thinking. So, in this left-wing counterculture, back in the old days, this left-wing counterculture in the old days was secretly run by the elites, and it had some interesting bits and pieces, giving women their rights, but it also had a lot of problems in it, and these problems were intentional. These were flaws built into the counterculture. And of course, this counterculture was infused with psychopathic ideas, narcissistic ideas, and also psychopathic individuals and narcissistic individuals. So, the left counterculture brought us esoterics, free sex, free love, alternatives to the classic family, living in a commune. There was a radical opposition to the classic family. The classic family was regarded as the source of all problems. So then, of course, you saw socialism, and that brought us a lot of problems. Drugs, obviously. Radical art, we saw. So the drug rock of the 60s and 70s, up to Marilyn Manson, anything that was considered shocking at the time. Usually a decade later, it's regarded as boring. Homosexuals got their rights. Women got their rights. Racism was pushed back. The schools changed. The influence of the churches was pushed back, but of course, the left-wing esoteric stuff was also, to some degree, controlled by the elites. So, of course, if you compare the story of the British Empire and modern esoterics, you will find some interesting connections there. Celebrities could finally admit to being leftists and all that. All this left-wing counterculture was poisoned, though. The icons of the movement oftentimes were clueless about important matters. They wanted to, celebrate sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Some of these leaders were strongly narcissistic, even psychopathic. They did not want to improve the world. They were drug addicts a lot of the time. And just clueless about what actually works in the world. Feminism was combined with narcissism. And whenever you combine something with narcissism, it ends up badly. So, taking healthy feminism and merging it or infusing narcissism into it created the problems we see today. Hating men. Believes that men are the problems of all, men are the root of all evil and the cause of all problems. Group narcissism. Feminist group narcissism is just another type of group narcissism, and it's always terrible. It's always terrible, so not all women are great. Not all men are great, right? Then we had left-wing politics. More and more left-wing politics, and it created a lot of problems, and it was violent. Left-wing politics was violent. Violent of a different kind, right? So if a left-wing party in the West conducts a war, it's called a humanitarian relief effort or some rescue mission or whatever. And the left-wing domestic violence policy was more akin to stealing more money through taxes and regulating everybody to death and punishing people for this and that. So it wasn't what the old right wing did, racism, beating people up. It was a different kind of domestic violence that we saw from the left. Yeah, socialism helped some people, but it also created this wasteful, monstrous apparatus. And no state could ever afford that kind of an apparatus. Left-wing counterculture ways of life resulted in some serious problems with children, like raising kids in a commune or anti-authoritarian ideas. All that created lots of problems. And of course, you had this pedophilia among left counterculture, this whole nonsense. All of that was poisoned. Then the left counterculture brought us a legal chaos. So everything is now criminalized and everything is more chaotic. And yeah, then porn. Just lots of porn. Too much porn. The news became very left-wing. Entertainment became very left-wing. So in the old days, if you try to put some left-wing concept or a left-wing idea on television, this was a risk. This was regarded as very controversial. And today, it's the other way around. If you try to make a conservative-leaning television show or you put in some conservative idea, that's controversial. That's going to create headaches in the television studio, and this is going to create a stir. See, the new season of Roseanne, the reboot of Roseanne, very successful, and all the show did was demonstrate what's going on in American society today. Families are torn in the middle. One half supports Trump, the other half hates Trump. And they put that into the screenplays, into the script for the new Roseanne season, the new reboot. And that created a stir. Oh my God, how dare Roseanne Barr have some respect for President Trump or tolerate President Trump? Remember in the 1990s when Roseanne was on the air, and they chose to have a minor character who was a lesbian. That was regarded as daring and controversial, and industry insiders were thinking, "Oh my God, can we get away with this? Is the audience going to tolerate that? Are the sponsors going to run away? Is this going to be a problem for us?" This was controversial. A minor character being a lesbian. And today would be a controversy if you don't have a gay character or something like that. See how that changed? Then, music. We've seen so many shocking music, Eminem, Marilyn Manson, and of course, creates a stir 5 years later, 10 years later. It's considered tame and or boring. Migration, the left counterculture brought us a ton of migration, and that's been problematic. And the analysis or the review of the past, that was done by the left. British colonialism, slave trade, genocide, Nazi era, and so on. That was done by the left, but in a terrible way, a very problematic way. Of course, the left never really or seldomly looked at the genocide in socialist countries and that sort of thing. And the way they tell the past is selective, and it's instrumentalized in very bad ways. So, until 1991, the end of the Soviet Union, conservatives were or conservatism was propped up and supported by the elites. Conservatives were needed. And after 1991, conservatives were not needed anymore by the elites, so they were dropped. And more we saw the West turn left. During the Cold War, the West was supposedly the conservative capitalist sphere, while the East was communist. But after 1991, all that changed. The West became very left. And this was a choice by the elites, by the Western superpower, the Western Empire. They just flipped it around. They turned the left counterculture into the new mainstream and pushed this new left mainstream continuously. So yeah, we saw the Bush administration, for example, and that was kind of the last big hoorah of conservatism, or so-called conservatism, of course, I'm using this term very loosely. But that's when everybody got utterly sick of it. The Bush administration was so terrible. The war on terror, the torture, the surveillance, all of this. What happened after 9/11? Subverting the Constitution, Patriot Act, and all that. So, yeah, people were sick of this. People were sick of this, and many people gladly joined the left, and that the left became the new mainstream in the West. So, and now, more than 25 years after the end of the Soviet Union, the West has become so left-wing that we're getting sick of it. The migrants, the brainwashing, the nonsense, the expensive socialism, the wastefulness of it all. Cultural Marxism. It's gotten so bad that many people in the West are sick and tired of it, and they want a change. They want a conservative revolution. And of course the elites know that, and of course the elites then started a phony revolution, or a poisoned revolution. And this is the so-called alt-right or new right. So it started a couple of years ago, or it became big a couple of years ago, because billionaires like the Mercers invested some of their money. They created stars, they put money into Bannon and Breitbart and Milo, and then you have this CNP network, Council for National Policy, which is basically a hub of front organizations. So weird billionaires, CIA connections, all this ultra right-wing establishment, old boys network, this CIA billionaire old boy network, they, through various fronts, they pushed this trend of the new right and the alt-right. And the elites, they let Donald Trump into the White House. They could have stopped him if they wanted to. No problem. I mean, just read some good literature on Trump and his mafia ties back in the old days and all the stuff he's been involved in. Yeah, he never got convicted of anything. But it was a crazy risk of putting him in the White House, right? I mean, who knows what information somebody has hidden somewhere and what this could be used for. So I warned of Trump from the beginning. I said, you know, there's no good reason to trust him just because he tweets some stuff and he says what people want. He said what people wanted to hear. He said what psychometrics determined the people out there were thinking. People wanted a wall to Mexico. They wanted to drain the swamp and all that. So Trump just said what the algorithms determined. Yeah, and so the right wing became the new counterculture. And so there's this fight, this race between the left wing and the right wing. And the right wing, which is currently in its counterculture phase, the right wing wants to become the dominant main line of politics and culture. And we don't exactly know who's going to win, because the outcome of that is usually determined by the elites. And we have to get wise about that. We have to determine that strategy. We have to build our own strategy. Otherwise, we're running in circles. We're just going to run in circles and never break free from this empire. I mean, you have to remember, the old left counterculture aimed to change the world, make the world a better place, and do all these great things. But what actually ended up happening? Yes, some things improved, a lot of stuff got worse. All those well-meaning lefties, they never got to force their ideas on everybody else, and they could never create, or they were never able to create a better world. It was a ginormous fail. And so if we, as conservatives or conservative-leaning people, if we apply the same formula as the left back then, if we apply the same primitive thinking and the same primitive strategies that the left used back then, we're going to fail as well. So, let's look at what the right-wing counterculture of today wants to implement, what its thinking, what its ideas are, and its wishes are. So, what we see a lot is the intention to hunt down and punish left-wingers, right? Left-wingers are supposed to be targeted, discriminated against, just like in the old days, right? That's something the new right or alt-right wants to do. And of course, this would only create chaos, and chaos is what the establishment wants. The right is too small to force its will upon everybody else. And the right wing cannot win a war, especially not a physical war, against the left and the Muslims and the minority and the political middle. Then, the new right, or alt-right, wants to glorify the past. That is something very problematic we're seeing. So, people in the alt-right or in the new right, they tend to they tend to bask in the glory of old colonialism, or they warmed up to the idea of a colonial empire, an Anglo-American empire. They like the idea of kings and queens and the promises of white supremacy. Slavery, ideas of slavery are getting more popular. Racial segregation, that's something that the alt-right or new right is floating around. And we see a lot of the ideas that were peddled in the past by the royal families and the colonial dictators. This idea of Western Christian crusaders and Western Christian imperialists, they're the only ones who are good. White Western imperialists are the only ones who bring civilization to the world. And we're the only ones who can do good, and everybody else is dumb, or everybody else just creates chaos and has nothing to offer for society. So basically what a lot of people in the alt-right movement or conspiracy movement are thinking right now is old world order propaganda. It's what the elites were thinking, and the kind of manipulation the elites was using to make the middle class go along with this imperialism. this whole divide and conquer. And we see a lot of racism in the alt-right and the so-called new right. And racism, ladies and gentlemen, is fraudulent. It is scientific fraud. You get alt-right people and alt-right people quote. You see them quote certain studies, and according to these studies, African Americans have a lower IQ on average than white Americans, or sub-Saharan Africans have a lower IQ on average compared to white people. And then, of course, you see the same people pointing at the West dominating, or white people dominating science, and so on and so forth. And from that, alt-right people draw this conclusion that racial segregation works, or is the only thing that's going to keep the world productive and peaceful. Now, of course, it's perfectly legitimate to say that America used to be and should be a predominantly white country. It's like the same as if you went up to an African country and told them, man, you should be 50% white or something. It's not realistic. It's going to be predominantly this or that ethnic group. Or nobody in his right mind in Russia would say, well, we're too Slavic. We need to be 20% Slavic and 20% this and 20% that. It's not realistic. You can't make the you can't seriously say that this is a good idea. So same goes with the West, Western countries, Western European countries, North America. Yeah, it's predominantly white, and it should be predominantly white, but still you have a melting pot. And you have African Americans that have been there for generations and generations. You have people from Spanish countries, or you have people from Asia, and all these people that came, for example, to America, and this became a melting pot. These people are Americans. It's not in any shape or form realistic, or it's not realistic, and it's not moral to call for and work towards racial segregation in America. I mean, what do some of these alt-right people expect to happen? What do they want to do? They want to push out every African American. They want to push out everybody with Asian heritage. It's asinine. It's, of course, immoral. It's insane. And of course, it's never going to work. It's a group narcissistic and psychopathic idea that is never going to work. It means the right wing is too weak to enforce its will on everybody else, or enforce the most extreme policies on everybody else. There's no consensus in the population. It's just a battle. And I would like to see some of these alt-right wing leaders. I would like to see if they actually have the guts to be in a shooting war. You know, a lot of them they're just pencil pushers, right? And yeah, all these kinds of problems in the alt-right. And of course, you could always find good conservative ideas. You could always push good conservative principles and create a consensus in the population and find a program that works for everybody. But no, the establishment pushed a phony revolution, a phony counterculture, the so-called new right or alt-right. And I'm not saying everybody who considers themselves alt-right or new right is bad, but you have to understand you're being played to a certain degree, just like the left was being played, just like everybody gets played. And be careful with so-called counterculture. Look at these different elements, these different ideas. Look at them separately and decide in a professional way what idea is good and what idea is terrible. And to be able to decide between good and bad ideas, to differentiate, you have to read quality books. And don't just read crap on Facebook, and don't just read the same blogs every day and watch the same YouTube channels every day. Don't go into an echo chamber. This is what the elites want. We also see, some weird ideas from the alt-right. Weird ideas from the alt-right about sex and marriage. So, supposedly, if you listen to this simplistic propaganda, if everybody were just to marry and have a classic family, everything would be good. But it's not that simple. A classic family could work perfectly fine. A classic family could be a terrible disaster. It depends on certain factors. And you can't simply, you can't make these simple slogans, and you can't attack people who are not married. I, for example, I have a classic family. I'm married. I've been married for 8 years, together 10 years, and we have 2 children. So I'm not just claiming certain values, I live them. But I see great people out there who are not married, who might get married, who might marry later, or who might never marry. But some of the stuff you see from the alt-right is outrageous. It sounds like the Taliban. And there was even this idea of a so-called white Sharia, kind of a white Christian version of Islamic Sharia, where you have a purity police. You have all this censorship, and porn should be illegal, and sex outside marriage should be illegal, and that should be illegal, and women should have no rights, and women should be married by their parents to some guy, and the girls being married, they're supposed to be 16 years old, right? All this craziness that we see from the alt-right. It's just poisonous nonsense. Entertainment is supposed to become ultra right-wing. The churches are supposed to become ultra powerful, like in Russia, where the state runs the churches, and the churches are like a mafia and tell the population what the government wants to put out there. Then discrimination against gays. So it's this very, very outdated and debunked idea that homosexuality is just a lifestyle, something that people just pick and choose, right? When science tells us that homosexuality is a real thing. There's always been like 1 or 2% of homosexuals in every given population, whether it's ancient Greece or it's the US today. Gays are gays. And of course, there's some people who are bisexual and whatnot, and some people who make more or less conscious decisions about their sexuality. But for the most part, it's very clearly defined. These people, when they're 12 or 13, they realize, oops, I'm into the same gender. And oh no, what trouble is that gonna cause? And so, we see a lot of confounding of issues in the alt-right, because for so long the left has instrumentalized gays. So now the new right, or the alt-right, doesn't look at this topic in a scientific way. The right wing now just claims, the right wing claims again that homosexuality is just a lifestyle choice. And if you punish people enough, and if you threaten people enough, they will stay away from that lifestyle. But of course, a policy like this is going to cause nothing but misery, as we see in Russia. Russia, gays are getting harassed, beaten up, terrified, put in prison. They don't have free speech and all those things, and it's not making Russia a better society. If you think Russia is a better society, you haven't read any decent book about Russia. Russia is an awful tyranny, and think about this: every gay person, even if you have decided to hate gays, or you have decided it's just a lifestyle, whatever, every gay person has a whole family and friends. So if you want to harass and criminalize gays, you're going to cause misery to 10 more people or 15 or 20 more people, right? It's going to erode morals in society if you try to harass people like that. Then right-wing, the alt-right, the alt-right wants right-wing politicians, and sometimes we see calls for a violent foreign policy and a violent domestic policy. So very problematic there. And of course, the alt-right promotes love for the Russian regime, and their idea of peaceful, or the alt-right idea of a peaceful foreign policy, is letting the Russians do whatever they want to do. So it might not be Trump who's doing most. Trump who is doing most of the violence. The alt-right is okay if the Russian regime is doing a lot of violence in their foreign policy. Very poisonous, very problematic. The news, if the alt-right gets its way, the news is, if they become dominant for a while, then of course it's going to change again. But if the alt-right dominates at some point in the near future, the news is going to look like the Alex Jones show or something like this. It's going to be alternative facts, very emotional and very crazy. We're going to see a lot of corruption, a lot of censorship of entertainment media. We're going to see problematic laws, so it will be harder to defend yourself against psychos and narcissists. And and some of the alt-right folks, they advocate for a new fascist type of school, public schools. We see that in Europe as well. I mean, French ultra-right-wing parties and Austrian and so on and so forth, they want to control the schools and the curriculum. Oftentimes they want to nationalize industry, and so it's kind of a so it's supposed to end up in some sort of national socialism. And we even see libertarians who have switched over to the alt-right, or who are at least partially moved over, have been partially recruited by the alt-right. Nowadays, you see extreme libertarians and libertarian anarchists promoting racial segregation, promote hatred against non-conservative ways of life. We see radical libertarians pushing a lot of alt-right nonsense, hatred of women and all that. It's crazy. It's crazy, and all these problematic ideas, they're only going to antagonize the population, and this is just creating chaos, and it's going to, at some point, give birth to a new left-wing counterculture. So imagine, next week or next month or in a year, there's going to be a war between the United States and North Korea and China. This is just a hypothetical scenario. It could be a different war. But let's just imagine there's a big war. And Trump will have 80-90% approval rating, right? Because we're at war, everybody loves the president when we're at war, and everybody wants a tough guy president when there's danger to our lives and our way of life. And so imagine if this war will lead to 10 years or 15 years or 20 years of a right-wing, dominant right-wing regime in the US. Imagine how terrible life will be under such a regime. And people will get sick, especially the young people will get sick of this, and they will fall after these 20 years, 15, 20 years, they will fall for the next wave of left counterculture. So, how do we break out of this nonsense? Well, first of all, read quality literature on intelligence agencies, criminology, psychology, learn about personality disorders, and learn to apply that knowledge. Learn to spot warning signs, especially warning signs with people who belong to your group, your peer group, your political group, especially when it comes to leaders or wannabe leaders. Screen these people. Learn how to screen. Learn about the history of the empires. Learn about the shady history of three superpowers and the secret history of how these superpowers came to be. The revolutionary wars of China, communist China, Russia, and the United States. And yeah, get quality literature. Get smart. And when you get smart, you can find trustworthy politicians. You can build a consensus in the population. You can float ideas that most people will agree to. You can create unity, some sort of unity in the population. You can keep this melting pot alive. And most of the times, it's actually not that hard to find positions that most people could agree to. Yes, you can hunt down dangerous extremists, no matter what they're like, what their ideology is. Yes, you can re-examine the past and the sins of the past in a productive manner. Yes, you can have a healthy view on sex. You can have decent media and entertainment and news media. You could have better churches. You could have healthy feminism and not narcissistic feminism. And you could have a more healthy gay community, you know, less problems. And you can have better politics. You can have better politicians. You can have better. You can have less corruption. You can have a better set of laws. And you can have a better school system and more liberty. So, for example, I grew up in a classic family, but unfortunately, my father was a heavy narcissist. So, just being in a classic family was not helpful. So, my mother, at some point, took control and did some brave things and was super productive, and she succeeded. And so that taught me something about real feminism, right? Not politicized, not narcissistic, but real feminism. But at the same time, I understand the necessity for male strength, true male strength, not narcissism, not psychopathic traits, but actual leadership, actual strength. There's a huge difference. So I didn't get recruited by some left-wing counterculture. I mean, when I was a teenager, I read books by Michael Moore. And when I was a teenager, I thought the establishment was kind of right-wing. But as time went on, and the more literature I read, good popular science literature, the more I read, the more I understood that ideology is a smokescreen most of the time, and ideologies are run by the elites. And then, besides, of course, you know, scientific books on history and the empires and intelligence agencies and so on, I also discovered the conspiracy media, more of the North American secular type, the more rational type. And this was 10 years ago or more, 13 years ago, was, for example, Alex Jones, who was against the left-right paradigm, who was against the east-west paradigm. So I never got my education from Alex Jones, but I got some motivation from Jones, and I got some ideas where to look further. Yeah, of course, the conspiracy scene or conspiracy culture was also regarded as being counterculture, anti-establishment. But if you look closely, very closely, and I've done this for one of my books, if you look very closely, and I've done this, you will find that the superpowers over the last 200 years have used a lot of conspiracy media and have instrumentalized and defined a lot of conspiracy media, starting with John Robinson's Proof of a Conspiracy and William Guy Carr, who was a man of the empire and spread all these myths and legends. And of course, modern anti-Semitism, the Anglo-American intelligence community diverting attention away from themselves and trying to get people's attention away and move this attention towards the Jewish community. So you might want to check out another video we've uploaded on our channel. It's called How to Bungle Conspiracy Reporting in 10 Easy Steps. So be very careful with counterculture and read more quality literature. Stay away from YouTube and the blogs and Facebook. If you like this video, subscribe, like, comment, send us an email or whatever, and visit our website, eng.recenter.com. Link is in the description below, and also check out our Patreon.